Greta Miller's hands are shaking as she moves closer to the door. The smell of soap and disinfectant fills the air. Behind her, women whisper the same terrifying words. This is where it starts. This is where they'll humiliate us. German officers had warned them before surrender. The Americans will make examples of women who serve the Reich. Expect degradation. They'll strip you and laugh. They'll punish you for everything Germany did. Greta had spent 3 years operating radio equipment for the Luftwaffe, helping bomb London and Rotterdam. The Americans have every reason to want revenge. When she finally steps through that door into the white-tiled room and sees what's waiting behind the steam, something happens that will shatter everything these women believed about enemies, dignity, and which side deserved their loyalty all along. The smell hit first. Steam and something floral that didn't belong in a prison camp. Greta Miller stood in line with 40 other women, all of them still wearing the clothes they'd traveled in. Gray-green skirts stiff with salt from the Atlantic crossing, blouses that hadn't been washed in weeks, stockings with holes worn through at the heel. The corridor was narrow, white tiles on the walls, gleaming under harsh electric lights. The floor was damp. Other groups had already been through, leaving wet footprints that hadn't dried yet. The air was thick with humidity, and the sharp tang of disinfectant layered over something sweeter. Lavender, maybe. Or rose. Something absurdly gentle for a place like this. The line moved slowly toward a door at the end. Through the gap, Greta could see white steam billowing out in thick clouds, could hear water running. A sound that should have been ordinary but felt ominous in this context. Her hands were shaking. Had been shaking since they'd been herded off the buses an hour ago. Since they'd been counted and tagged and separated into groups. Since an American officer had pointed at this building and said something in English, none of them fully understood, but all of them interpreted as command. Behind her, the woman from Hamburg, Greta had learned her name was Elsa during the Atlantic crossing, whispered the same thing she'd been whispering since surrender. This is where it starts. This is where they'll humiliate us. Greta didn't respond, just kept her eyes on the back of the woman in front of her, a tall blonde from Stuttgart whose shoulders were rigid with the same tension Greta felt in her own spine. The blonde's hair was matted at the nape of her neck. Everyone's hair was matted. Weeks without washing. Months, for some. The line shuffled forward another step. The woman ahead of Greta stumbled slightly, caught herself against the tiled wall, left a handprint in the condensation that had formed there. The print looked ghostly in the bright light. Proof that they were real, that this was happening. Greta's heart was beating too fast. She could feel it in her throat, in her wrists, a panicked rhythm that made her dizzy. They'd been told so many things during the surrender, during the chaotic weeks when Germany collapsed and the auxiliaries, the Helferinnen, were rounded up like livestock. Officers had pulled them aside in railway stations and whispered warnings. The Americans will not be merciful. They'll make examples of women who serve the Reich. Expect degradation. Expect cruelty. They'll strip you and laugh. They'll punish you for everything Germany did. And Greta had believed them. Why wouldn't she? She'd spent 3 years operating radio equipment for the Luftwaffe, had typed orders and decoded messages, and been part of the machine that had bombed London and Rotterdam and dozens of other cities. The Americans had every reason to want revenge. Someone in front coughed, a wet, rattling sound. The woman from Berlin, older than most of them, maybe 35. She'd been coughing since they boarded the ship. Pneumonia, probably, or tuberculosis. Or just the accumulated damage of breathing smoke and dust and fear for too many years. Do you think they'll shave our heads? A voice whispered. Someone Greta didn't know. Young-sounding, frightened. No one answered. Because they didn't know. Because anything seemed possible. Because they'd all heard stories, rumors from other prisoners, whispered accounts of what had been done to collaborators in France, in Belgium, in the occupied territories when they were liberated. Women dragged into streets, heads shaved, stripped naked, paraded through towns while people spat and threw stones. That could be waiting for them on the other side of this door. The line moved again. Greta was only 5 people back now. Close enough to see into the room beyond. Close enough to make out details through the steam. White tiles, rows of shower heads mounted on the wall, benches where women could sit. A cart with something stacked on it. She couldn't tell what. And American women in white uniforms, moving efficiently, handing things out, giving instructions. The professional calm of it was almost more frightening than violence would have been. At least violence you could understand, could brace for. This orderly processing felt like the prelude to something worse. Greta thought about the last time she'd had a proper bath. December maybe, at home in Munich, before she'd been sent to the radio station in Frankfurt. Her mother had heated water on the stove, 3 pots worth, which was an extravagance even then. Greta had washed in a tin basin in the kitchen while her mother stood guard at the window in case the neighbors reported them for wasting fuel. The water had been lukewarm. The soap was something her mother had made from ashes and fat. Gray, gritty, smelled like nothing except chemical harshness. But it had been private. Safe. Her own. Since then, cold rivers during retreat. Sponge baths with freezing water in railway bathrooms. Nothing resembling actual cleanliness. Just survival maintenance. Just wiping away enough dirt to function another day. The woman directly in front of Greta, the blonde from Stuttgart, turned slightly and caught her eye. Her face was gray with exhaustion and fear. "Whatever they do," she said quietly, "don't cry. Don't give them the satisfaction." Greta nodded, but she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. Wasn't sure what would break her and what wouldn't. Another step forward. 3 people ahead now. Through the doorway, Greta could see women emerging from the other side of the room, wrapped in towels, hair wet, faces flushed from heat. They looked dazed, confused, but not beaten, not visibly injured. That should have been reassuring, but it made Greta more nervous, because she couldn't read their expressions, couldn't tell if what had happened to them had been better or worse than expected. 2 people ahead, Else was breathing too fast behind her, hyperventilating slightly. Greta could hear the wheeze in her throat. "Breathe slower," Greta said without turning around. "You'll pass out." "I can't." Elsa's voice was thin, on the edge of panic. "I can't do this. I can't." "You can. You have to." Because there was no alternative, no escape, just forward, just whatever waited on the other side of that door. 1 person ahead. The blonde from Stuttgart stepped through the doorway and disappeared into the steam. Greta was next. She forced her legs to move, forced herself through the threshold into the heat and humidity and the smell of disinfectant and flowers. The room was divided into 2 sections. The first, where Greta now stood, was a kind of anteroom. Tiled floor, the metal cart she'd glimpsed earlier. 2 American women in white uniforms, both middle-aged, both moving with the brisk efficiency of people who'd done this hundreds of times. One of them gestured to Greta, said something in English, firm but not cruel. The tone you'd use with a child or a confused patient. Greta didn't understand the words, just stood there, frozen. The woman repeated herself, slower this time, then reached toward the cart and picked up something, a bar of soap. She placed it in Greta's hands. Greta stared at it. White, rectangular, heavy. It smelled faintly of flowers, lavender, she thought now, or maybe lily, something clean and gentle that seemed to come from another world. She turned it over in her hands. The surface was smooth, pristine. It had actual weight to it, not like the watery substitutes they'd been using in Germany, not like the ash and fat bars that dissolved into gray slime after one use. This was real soap, American soap, the kind that probably cost more than Greta's mother earned in a week, the kind that had advertisements in magazines, the kind that rich women used before the war, and they were handing it to prisoners. Greta looked up at the American woman, searching for the trap, the trick, the moment when they'd snatch it back and laugh. But the woman was already moving to the next person, already handing Elsa her own bar, professional, mechanical, like she was distributing supplies, not setting up humiliation. Behind the American women, Greta could see a doorway leading to the second part of the room, the actual shower area. More steam poured through. She could hear water running, could hear women's voices, German, speaking quietly, someone laughing nervously, someone else crying. "Next," the American woman said, or something like that. The meaning was clear even if the word wasn't. Greta clutched the soap and walked toward the second doorway. The heat hit like a wall. After months of cold trains, cold ship holds, cold fear, the warmth felt aggressive, physical. It made her skin prickle and her vision blur. The room was larger than the anteroom, maybe 20 feet by 30. White tiles covered every surface. A row of 10 shower heads mounted along the far wall, spaced about 4 feet apart. Already running. Water streaming down in steady falls. Wooden benches lined the wall opposite the showers. That's where the women sat to undress. Greta found an empty space on the middle bench and sat down carefully. The wood was damp, warm. Her hands were still shaking. The soap was starting to get slippery from the humidity. Around her, women were in various stages of undress. Some already naked, moving toward the showers with arms wrapped around themselves. Others still sitting, staring at their hands, unable to make themselves continue. The blonde from Stuttgart was 2 benches over. She'd taken off her blouse but had stopped there, just sitting in her skirt and undershirt, staring at the floor, breathing in short gasps. Beside Greta, a woman she didn't know, dark-haired, maybe 28, was crying silently as she unbuttoned her dress. Tears streaming down her face but making no sound, just water leaking from her eyes while her fingers worked mechanically. Greta understood. It wasn't modesty exactly. They'd all lived in close quarters for months, had shared latrines and changing spaces, and the particular loss of privacy that came with war. They'd seen each other's bodies before. This was different. This was vulnerability in enemy territory. This was being naked in a place where you had no power, no control, no way to protect yourself if violence came. Greta set the soap down on the bench beside her, started unbuttoning her blouse. Her fingers didn't want to cooperate. The buttons were stiff. Salt and sweat had hardened the fabric. She had to work each one free. The blouse finally came off. Underneath, her undershirt was gray with dirt and sweat. She pulled it over her head. Her skin was pale, too pale, and she could see her ribs more clearly than she should have been able to. Everyone had lost weight in the final months, but seeing it now, seeing her own body reduced to this, made something twist in her chest. She unbuttoned her skirt, let it fall, stepped out of it, removed her stockings. Both had holes at the toes. Her underwear was the last thing. She hesitated for a moment, then removed those too. Naked, she felt every bit as exposed as she'd feared, but there was also a strange relief in it. These clothes had been with her since Frankfurt, had been her uniform, her identity. Removing them felt like shedding something more than fabric. She stood up, picked up the soap, forced her legs to move toward the showers. An American guard stood near the entrance to the shower area, female, also in white. She had a clipboard and was marking something down. She looked up as Greta approached, made eye contact. Greta froze, waiting for the insult, the mockery, the look of disgust. Instead, the guard just gestured toward an empty shower head, said something in English that sounded almost encouraging. The tone was neutral, professional. Not warm, but not cruel either. Greta walked to the indicated shower, stood in front of it for a moment. The water was falling right there. All she had to do was step under it, but she couldn't move. Her legs had locked. Her body was refusing the command, because once she stepped under that water, there was no going back. Whatever happened next would happen. And she couldn't prepare for it, couldn't control it, could only experience it. She thought about her mother, about the basement in Munich where she was probably sleeping right now, or trying to, about the cold, about the hunger, about the fear that never went away even when the bombs stopped falling. What would her mother say if she could see Greta now, standing in an enemy prison about to shower with real soap while her mother boiled weeds for soup? Greta didn't know, couldn't imagine it. She stepped under the water and froze for a different reason. It was hot, not lukewarm, not tepid, actually hot. Water that steamed as it hit the tiles, water that made her gasp out loud with the shock of it. Her body didn't know what to do. After so many months of cold water, cold air, cold fear, this sudden heat was almost painful. Her muscles seized, her breathing stopped. Then slowly, she felt her shoulders begin to relax, felt tension she hadn't known she was carrying start to release. The heat was working its way into her muscles, into her bones, into places that had been clenched tight since surrender. Around her, she heard other sounds beginning. The woman she'd seen crying was laughing now, high-pitched, almost hysterical. Someone else was sobbing openly, not trying to hide it. Someone saying, "Oh God," over and over in German, like a prayer or a curse or both at once. Greta looked down at the soap in her hand. It was getting wet, softening. She rubbed it between her palms experimentally. Foam appeared immediately, thick, white, abundant, actual lather, real soap lather. She hadn't seen this since before the war, since before everything. She spread it across her arms, her shoulders, her neck. The sensation was so strange she felt dizzy. The smoothness of it, the way it slid across skin without catching on dirt. The smell that was clean and gentle and completely foreign to everything she'd experienced in the past year. The water sluiced the foam away, carrying with it weeks of grime. Months, really. The dirt from German roads, The salt from the Atlantic. The particular stink of fear that had been clinging to her since the day she surrendered. She washed her hair, ran the soap through the tangles, had to work it through matted sections, but it came loose. The soap cut through the oil and dirt. She could feel her hair becoming lighter, cleaner. Her scalp tingled. She couldn't tell if it was from the soap or just from the sensation of being clean. She tilted her head back, let the water run down her face. It was almost too hot, almost burned. But she didn't move, just stood there with her eyes closed, feeling water wash away more than just physical filth. It washed away the ship, the train, the railway yard where they'd been sorted like cattle, the terror of the last 3 months. For just a moment, just this one moment, there was nothing but heat and water and the smell of soap. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw the blonde from Stuttgart 2 showers over. She'd made it under the water. Was standing with her face pressed against the tiled wall, shoulders shaking, crying, or laughing. Maybe both. The dark-haired woman was scrubbing her arms so hard her skin was turning red, scrubbing like she could wash away more than dirt, like she could remove the past 3 years, the uniform, the service, the complicity. Greta looked at her own arms, at the soap lather sliding down toward her hands, at water carrying everything away. She understood the impulse. Understood wanting to scrub hard enough to become someone else, someone who hadn't served the Reich, someone who didn't carry guilt like a second skin. But you couldn't wash away memory, couldn't scrub off history. All you could do was stand under hot water that came from the enemy's pipes and try to understand what it meant. When the water finally shut off, some timer or signal Greta didn't see, the women stood dripping on the tiles, looking at each other with expressions of shared bewilderment. For a moment, no one moved, just stood there, naked and wet and confused. Then one of the American women called out something, instructions, probably, and gestured toward another doorway. The women moved slowly, still cautious, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Through the doorway was another small room. Towels were stacked on a table, clean towels, white, thick. Not the thin rags they'd been using in Germany, actual towels that looked like they'd absorb water instead of just pushing it around. Another American woman, this one younger, maybe 25, was distributing them. 1 per person. She handed Greta a towel without comment, without expression. Greta took it, held it for a moment. It was soft, actually soft, and it smelled like detergent. Clean detergent. The American kind that had been in advertisements before the war. She pressed it to her face, felt the texture against her skin, felt water being absorbed, felt warmth that didn't come from fear or shame, but from simple cleanliness. She dried herself slowly. Her arms, her legs, her hair. The towel darkened as it took on moisture, but it didn't fall apart, didn't disintegrate into threads, just worked the way towels were supposed to work. When she was dry, actually dry for the first time in weeks, another American woman directed them toward yet another table. This one had clothes stacked on it, clean clothes, not their old uniforms, not prison garb exactly, just simple cotton dresses, plain, serviceable, but clean. Smelling of starch and detergent and newness. Greta was given a dress. It was blue, faded blue, like it had been washed many times, but it was whole. No tears, no stains, no salt crusting at the hem. She pulled it over her head. It was too big, hung loose on her frame, the shoulders drooping. But it was clean. That was all that mattered. It was clean, and it smelled clean, and when she moved, the fabric moved with her instead of sticking to her skin with sweat and dirt. She was given underwear too. Plain white cotton, used probably, but clean, laundered, smelling like soap. There were no stockings, no shoes yet. Those would come later, someone said in broken German. For now, just the dress and underwear. Greta dressed, looked around at the others doing the same. They all looked strange, unfamiliar. Clean faces, clean hair, clean clothes. They looked less like prisoners and more like people. Tired people, scared people, but people. The barracks were a 10-minute walk from the shower building. The women were marched, not roughly, but firmly, along a gravel path that crunched under their bare feet. The air outside was warm. Southern warmth. Different from German warmth. Heavier, more humid. The sky was blue, perfectly blue. No smoke, no planes. Just blue with white clouds drifting slowly. Greta couldn't remember the last time she'd seen a sky that clear. The barracks building was long and wooden. painted white, 2 windows on each side, a door at one end, neat, orderly, built with American efficiency. Inside, rows of bunk beds, maybe 20 bunks total, which meant the room would hold 40 women. 2 high. Each bunk had a thin mattress, a pillow, 2 blankets folded at the foot. A stove stood in the center of the room. Not lit now, it was too warm. But it was there, for winter, for cold nights. Windows with actual glass, not broken, not taped, just glass, a wooden floor, clean, swept. It was austere, institutional. But it wasn't cruel, wasn't designed to break people, just to house them efficiently. The women filed in silently, each finding a bunk, testing, evaluating. Greta chose one near the middle, not too close to the door, not too far back. A middle position that felt safer somehow, less exposed. She sat on the edge of the mattress. It was thin, but it was a mattress. She pressed her hand down. It compressed. Not much give, but better than floor. Better than the straw pallet some of them had been sleeping on during the retreat. The blankets were wool, gray, scratchy when she touched them. But they were whole, and they were wool, which meant warmth. Greta lay back, stared at the bottom of the bunk above her. The wood was smooth. Someone had built this carefully, had measured and cut and assembled these boards with precision, had created shelter that was functional and adequate. Her skin still smelled like the soap. Her hair was still damp, drying slowly in the warm air. The dress was loose but comfortable, clean cotton against clean skin. And she felt wrong, felt guilty, felt like a traitor. Because while she lay here clean and dry and safe, her mother was in a basement in Munich, boiling weeds, wearing the same dress for 8 months because there was no fabric, using ashes to wash her hair because there was no soap. The contrast was unbearable. Around her, other women were settling in, testing their mattresses, folding and unfolding their blankets, moving slowly, carefully, like they were afraid sudden movement would shatter the fragile safety of this moment. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, someone did. The older woman from Berlin, the one who'd been coughing in line. She was in a bunk across the aisle from Greta. "They're following the rules," she said. Her voice was hoarse from disuse and illness. "The Geneva Convention. That's what this is. They have to treat us according to protocol." Several women turned to look at her, Greta included. "Rules," someone repeated. The word sounded foreign, abstract. "Germany stopped following those rules years ago," another woman said quietly. Young, maybe 19, from somewhere in Bavaria. "We didn't treat their prisoners like this." Silence fell again. Heavy, suffocating, because it was true. They all knew it was true. The things that had happened in the camps, not just the concentration camps that everyone whispered about but didn't discuss directly. The POW camps too. The starvation, the abuse, the casual cruelty that had been normalized until it wasn't even remarked upon anymore. Russian prisoners dying by the thousands in open fields. British airmen beaten. Americans denied medical care. All of it justified. All of it rationalized. And now here they were, enemy prisoners, being given soap and hot water and mattresses and blankets, being treated according to standards their own country had abandoned. The weight of that realization settled over the barracks like physical pressure, heavy enough to make breathing difficult. Else, the Hamburg woman, was in the bunk next to Greta's. She sat with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around her legs, rocking slightly. "My husband was at Stalingrad," she said to no one in particular. "They said prisoners of war would be treated humanely. That international law protected soldiers." She paused, laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "He froze to death in a Russian camp. They had no food, no shelter, just snow and death." No one responded. What could you say? "And now we get hot water," Elsa continued. Her voice was flat, empty. "We get soap. We get mattresses. The enemy treats us better than our own country treated theirs." The blonde from Stuttgart, Greta had heard someone call her Margaret, spoke up from across the room. "Maybe that's why we lost." Everyone looked at her. "Maybe," Margaret continued. "Maybe you don't win wars by being cruel. Maybe cruelty just makes you into something that deserves to lose." "Don't say that," someone hissed. "Don't." "Why not?" Margaret's voice was sharp, brittle. "What are they going to do? Punish us more? We're already prisoners. We've already lost everything." "You haven't lost everything. The Berlin woman said quietly. You're alive. You're clean. You have a bed. That's more than millions of Germans have right now. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, had no response. Because it was true. They were alive. That alone made them luckier than most. As darkness fell, the lights in the barracks dimmed but didn't go out completely. A low glow remained, enough to see by, but dim enough to sleep if you could sleep. Greta lay in her bunk, wrapped in the wool blanket, listening to the sounds around her. Women breathing, someone crying very quietly into her pillow, trying to muffle it but not quite succeeding. Someone else whispering prayers in the darkness. Latin, maybe. Or just German prayers said so fast they blurred together. Outside, crickets chirped. The sound was strange, foreign. American crickets making American sounds in American darkness. Greta reached under her thin pillow and pulled out the small notebook she'd managed to keep through everything. A stub of pencil, too, worn down to almost nothing but still functional. She'd been writing in it sporadically since the collapse. Little observations, fragments of thoughts, nothing coherent. Just a way to prove to herself that she still existed as a thinking person and not just a body being moved from place to place. Now she opened it carefully. The pages were warped from humidity. Some of the earlier entries had smudged, but it was still readable, still hers. She found a blank page, stared at it in the dim light. What could she write? How could she explain what had happened today? Her hand hovered over the page for a long time, the pencil tip touching paper but not moving. Finally, she started writing, her handwriting cramped and uneven in the poor light. They told us we would be punished. She paused. The sentence looked small, inadequate. They told us the Americans would make us suffer. That captivity would be degradation and cruelty, that they would strip us and mock us and break us. The pencil was shaking in her hand now, making the letters uneven. Instead, they gave us soap. She stared at those 5 words for a long time. They looked absurd written down, childish, insufficient to capture what had actually happened, what it had meant, but they were true. They were the core truth of the day. Hot water that burned, towels that were soft, clean clothes that smelled like detergent. Things we haven't had in months. Things my mother doesn't have. Things I don't deserve. Her hand was really shaking now. The letters were becoming illegible. How can this be? How can the enemy treat us better than our own country treated us? What does it mean if kindness comes from the wrong people? What does it mean if dignity is given by those we were taught to hate? She couldn't write anymore. Her hand was cramping. Her eyes were burning with tears she wouldn't let fall. The questions were too big, too frightening, because answering them meant dismantling everything, meant admitting that maybe, just maybe, everything she'd believed about the enemy was a lie. And if that was a lie, then what else? What other lies had she served? What other falsehoods had she typed into radio messages and transmitted across Europe? Greta closed the notebook, slid it back under her pillow, lay down, pulled the scratchy wool blanket up to her chin. The smell of the soap was fading now, but she could still detect it if she breathed deeply, still feel the ghost of hot water on her skin, still sense the strange cleanness that shouldn't have come from enemy hands. Around her, the barracks settled into something resembling sleep, but it was restless, uneasy, the sleep of people who'd had their expectations shattered and didn't know what would replace them. Tomorrow there would be more. Processing, work assignments, the routines of captivity. But tonight, in the darkness, 40 German women lay in American bunks and tried to reconcile what they'd been told with what they'd experienced, tried to understand why soap felt more dangerous than any weapon, tried to figure out what it meant that their bodies had been returned to them with dignity by people they'd been taught to hate. Margaret's voice came softly from across the room. Do you think they'll feed us tomorrow? No one answered at first. Then the Berlin woman. Yes, they have to. Geneva Convention. What if it's real food? Another voice asked. Young, frightened. What if it's better than what our families have? Silence, because they were all thinking the same thing, all carrying the same guilt, all wondering how they would live with being warm and fed and clean while Germany starved in ruins. Greta closed her eyes, tried to sleep, but the soap had done something to her, had washed away more than dirt, had stripped away some layer of certainty she hadn't known she was carrying until it was gone. And in that stripped, raw space, questions multiplied. Questions that wouldn't be answered by morning, or the morning after, or maybe ever. Just questions. Hanging in the air like the steam from the showers, impossible to ignore, impossible to escape. The first night in captivity, and already everything she'd believed was beginning to crack. Outside, the crickets sang. American crickets in American darkness. And inside, women who'd served the Reich tried to understand why the enemy had given them soap instead of suffering. Tried to understand what that meant about the enemy, and what it meant about themselves. The bell woke them before dawn, a harsh metallic sound that cut through sleep and dragged them back into consciousness. For a moment, Greta didn't know where she was. The mattress beneath her was too soft. The air didn't smell like diesel or sweat. Then memory returned. The camp. The showers. The soap. America. Around her, women stirred, groaned, sat up slowly, hair still damp from the night before, sticking to faces and necks. The barracks was dim in the pre-dawn light, but Greta could make out shapes. Bodies moving. Blankets being folded with mechanical precision because that's what you did in the military, even when the military no longer existed. An American guard appeared at the door. Female. Different from yesterday's guards, she said something in English, gestured. The meaning was clear enough. Get up, get ready, move. They dressed in the same cotton dresses from yesterday. Nothing else had been issued yet. No undergarments beyond what they'd received. No shoes, just bare feet on wooden floors. Greta folded her blanket, smoothed it, set her pillow at the head of the bunk. The routine was comforting somehow, familiar in a world that had become completely unfamiliar. Else was moving slowly in the next bunk. Her face was puffy from crying. She'd been one of the ones weeping last night, trying to muffle the sound but not quite managing. She caught Greta's eye and looked away immediately, embarrassed. "Did you sleep?" Greta asked quietly. Else shook her head. "You?" "A little." It was a lie. Greta had maybe slept 2 hours. The rest of the night had been spent staring at the bunk above her, thinking about soap and hot water and what it meant. The guard gestured again, more insistent this time. The women began filing toward the door. Outside, the air was cool. Not cold, nothing like German cold, but cool enough to raise goosebumps on bare arms. The sky was lightening in the east, turning from black to deep blue to something approaching dawn. They were marched along the gravel path, 40 women in faded cotton dresses, barefoot, hair uncombed, faces still creased from pillows. They looked like refugees, which, Greta supposed, they were. The path led to another building, longer than the barracks, wooden, also painted white, windows along both sides. A door at one end propped open. Even from outside, Greta could smell it. Coffee, bread, something frying in grease. The smell hit her like a physical blow. Her stomach clenched, her mouth filled with saliva, her body responding before her mind could catch up. When was the last time she'd smelled bread baking? Real bread, not the black sawdust loaves they'd been eating for the past 2 years, not ersatz bread made with ground acorns and wood pulp. Real wheat bread. The line slowed as they approached the door. Women ahead were hesitating, stopping, as if the smell alone was too much to process. Margaret, the blonde from Stuttgart, was directly in front of Greta. She'd stopped completely in the doorway, blocking the entrance, just standing there, frozen. "Move," the guard said in English, or something like that. The tone was firm. Margaret didn't move. The guard said it again, sharper this time. Margaret took one step forward, then another, disappeared into the building. Greta followed. The room was overwhelming, long, maybe 60 feet. Tables arranged in rows. 4 long tables that could seat 10 people on each side. Benches instead of chairs. At the far end, a serving counter with American soldiers, men and women both, standing behind it with ladles and tongs and stacks of metal trays. The windows were fogged with steam. The air was thick with smells that Greta's brain couldn't quite process all at once. Coffee. Definitely coffee. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute. Bread, grease, meat. Something sweet. Butter, maybe. The ceiling had exposed beams. Light fixtures hung at intervals, casting harsh yellow light across everything. The walls were bare wood, functional, plain, but clean. Everything was clean. The women filed in slowly, moving like they were in a dream or a nightmare. Greta wasn't sure which. An American soldier, male, young, maybe 22, gestured toward the serving line. His expression was neutral, not friendly, not hostile, just professional. The line formed automatically. They'd all been trained in lines, how to stand, how to wait, how to move when instructed. Greta found herself shuffling forward, one small step at a time. Else was behind her. Margaret ahead, the Berlin woman somewhere further up. As they got closer to the counter, Greta could see what was being served. Metal trays, divided into sections, being filled by American cooks in white aprons. One section, scrambled eggs, actual eggs, yellow, fluffy, more eggs than Greta had seen in months. Another section, fried potatoes, sliced thin, crispy, glistening with grease. Another, something that looked like porridge or grits, white, steaming, and bread, slices of white bread, actually white, not gray, not black, white, butter in small squares on the side, coffee poured into metal cups. Greta's hands were shaking again as she picked up a tray. The metal was cold, heavy, real. She moved along the counter. The first cook, middle-aged woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, dropped a spoonful of eggs onto Greta's tray. Then another spoonful. Enough eggs for 2 people, 3 people maybe. The next cook added potatoes, a heap of them, more than a single serving, more than a meal. The next added 2 slices of bread, placed a pat of butter beside them. Coffee was poured, black, steaming. The smell made Greta dizzy. At the end of the line, someone handed her a spoon and a fork, real metal utensils, not wooden, not makeshift, metal that had weight and substance. Greta stood there holding her tray, staring at it, trying to understand what she was seeing. This wasn't rations, wasn't the bare minimum required to keep prisoners alive. This was food, actual food, more food than she'd eaten in a week in Germany, maybe a month. "Keep moving," the young American soldier said, or something like that. Greta forced her legs to work, carried her tray to one of the long tables, sat down on a bench. Around her, other women were doing the same, sitting, staring at their trays. No one was eating yet, just staring. The smell was overwhelming this close. The eggs had butter in them. She could see the yellow fat glistening. The potatoes were salted. The bread was soft, fresh, probably baked this morning. Her stomach was cramping with hunger, but her hands wouldn't move, couldn't pick up the fork, couldn't take the first bite. Because if she ate this, what did that make her? A traitor? A collaborator? Someone who'd forgotten her family starving in Germany while she ate eggs and potatoes in an enemy camp? Beside her, Elsa was crying again, silent tears running down her face while she stared at her tray. "My brothers," Elsa whispered. "My brothers starved in Russia. They sent us letters about the hunger, about eating bark and snow, about men dying in their sleep because their bodies just gave up." She picked up her fork, set it down, picked it up again. And here they feed us like this. Across the table, Margaret had picked up her fork, was holding a piece of egg on it, just holding it, staring at it like it might bite her. "It's not poisoned," said a voice. The Berlin woman. She was 2 seats down, and she was eating, fork to mouth, chewing, swallowing. "They're not trying to kill us. They're just feeding us." "Just feeding us," someone repeated. The words sounded absurd, but the Berlin woman was right. If they wanted prisoners dead, there were easier ways, faster ways. This wasn't cruelty. This was something else. Greta picked up her fork, speared a small piece of egg, brought it to her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue. Salt, butter, actual egg flavor. Not the powdered substitute, not the watery government-issued ersatz eggs, real eggs from real chickens cooked in real butter. She chewed slowly, swallowed. Her stomach received the food with something between gratitude and shock. She took another bite, then another. Around her, other women were beginning to eat now, some slowly, some frantically, shoveling food into their mouths as fast as they could chew, some still crying while they ate, tears mixing with eggs and potatoes. Greta ate the eggs, then the potatoes. They were crispy on the outside, soft inside, salted perfectly. She could taste oil, real oil, not the rancid substitute Germany had been using. The bread was next. She spread the butter, actual butter, yellow and soft, across one slice, bit into it. The texture was so soft it almost dissolved. The butter melted. The bread tasted like wheat, like sunshine, like everything she'd forgotten bread could be. She ate both slices, licked butter from her fingers. The coffee was last. She sipped it carefully. It was strong, bitter, hot, real coffee, American coffee. The kind that cost more than a week's salary in Germany before the war. The kind that had been rationed out of existence by 1943. She drank it all. When she set down the empty cup, her tray was clean, every scrap eaten. She'd even wiped up the remaining egg with her fingers. Her stomach was full for the first time in months. Actually full. Not just not empty, full. And she felt sick. Not physically sick, emotionally sick, morally sick. Because while she sat here, full and warm, her mother was in Munich boiling weeds. Her neighbors were standing in bread lines for rations that barely sustained life. Children were dying of hunger in cities across Germany, and she'd just eaten eggs and potatoes and white bread with butter. In an enemy prison camp, given freely by people she'd been taught to hate. The contradiction was unbearable. They were marched back to the barracks after breakfast, given 30 minutes to settle in before work assignments would be distributed. That's what the guard said anyway, or what Greta thought she said based on gestures and tone. In the barracks, women lay on bunks or sat on benches, holding their stomachs. Some looked ill, some looked dazed, all looked confused. "I'm going to vomit," someone said, a young woman from Bremen. "I ate too much, I'm going to—" She ran outside. They could hear her retching in the grass. Else sat on her bunk with her knees pulled up, arms wrapped around her stomach. "I can't feel hunger anymore," she said. "For the first time in 2 years, I can't feel it. And I don't know if that's mercy or torture." Margaret was pacing, back and forth along the narrow aisle between bunks. "They're fattening us up," she said, "like livestock. They'll feed us until we're healthy again, and then—" "And then what?" the Berlin woman interrupted. "Execute us. They could do that now, could have done it yesterday. There's no logic in feeding us first." "Maybe there's no logic at all," Greta said quietly. "Maybe they just follow rules, feed prisoners, wash them, house them, because that's protocol." "Protocol," Elsa repeated. She laughed. It was a harsh sound. Germany's protocol was to starve enemy prisoners, to work them to death, to use them until they collapsed. "I know. So what does it mean that the enemy has better protocol than we did?" No one answered, because the answer was too terrible to say out loud. At mid-morning, the guard returned with a clipboard. She read names in heavily accented German. Each name was followed by an assignment: kitchen, laundry, grounds, fields. Greta's name was called Müller Wäscherei, laundry. She was grouped with 10 other women. They were marched to another building, smaller, made of concrete, with narrow windows high on the walls. Inside, industrial washing machines, huge metal tubs, drying lines strung from wall to wall, tables for folding. The heat was immediate. Washing machines generated steam. The air was thick with it, smelled like soap and bleach and hot metal. An American woman, older, maybe 50, arms thick with muscle, gestured toward baskets filled with dirty laundry. Uniforms, sheets, towels, all American military issue. The work was straightforward. Wash, rinse, dry, fold. 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. They would be paid. The guard had said something about camp script, currency that could be used at the canteen. Greta didn't know what a canteen was, but she picked up a uniform shirt from the basket and carried it to the washing tub. The fabric was thick, heavy cotton. The tag said U.S. Army. There was a name stenciled on the inside collar, Patterson. She was washing the clothes of an American soldier, someone who'd fought against Germany, someone who might have bombed Munich, who might have killed Germans, and she was being paid to do it. The absurdity made her want to laugh, or cry, or both. She scrubbed the shirt, rinsed it, wrung out the water, hung it to dry, picked up the next one, and the next. The work was monotonous, mindless. Her hands knew what to do without thought. Scrub, rinse, wring, hang. Around her, the other women worked in silence. No one spoke, just the sound of water and fabric and the occasional hiss of steam. Greta found herself falling into a rhythm, her body grateful for the mindless repetition, for work that didn't require decisions or thought, just motion. By lunch, her hands were raw. The soap, industrial soap, harsh, had stripped away the softness from yesterday's bath, but the work felt good in a way she couldn't articulate, felt like proof that she still had purpose, still had function. They were given lunch in the mess hall again. More food, sandwiches this time, thick slices of bread with cheese and some kind of meat, an apple, more coffee. Greta ate mechanically. The food was good, her body was grateful, her mind was numb. On the third day, after 3 mornings of overwhelming breakfast, 3 days of laundry work, 3 nights of lying awake wrestling with guilt, the guard announced that canteen privileges would begin. They would be paid on Fridays, camp script, could be used to purchase items. The canteen was open every evening for 1 hour. That first evening, Greta followed the other women to a small building near the barracks. Inside, shelves. And on the shelves, things that seemed to come from another universe. Chocolate bars, Hershey's, wrapped in brown paper and foil, cigarettes, packs of them, American brands she didn't recognize, toothpaste, toothbrushes, actual dental care, soap, individual bars like the ones they'd been given at the shower, available for purchase, pencils, paper, envelopes, lipstick, in small metal tubes, red, pink, colors she'd forgotten existed, magazines, American magazines with glossy covers showing women in fashionable clothes. Greta stood in the doorway, unable to enter, unable to process what she was seeing. These were luxuries, frivolous luxuries, things no one in Germany had access to anymore, things that had been memory for years. And here they were, available to prisoners, in exchange for wages earned washing enemy uniforms. Else walked past her into the shop, picked up a chocolate bar with trembling hands, turned it over. Read the wrapper even though the words were English and meaningless. "How much?" she asked the American woman behind the counter. The woman said something, held up fingers. "The price." Else set the chocolate back down. But she stared at it like it was sacred, like it was proof of something she couldn't name. Margaret bought lipstick, red lipstick. She took it back to the barracks and sat on her bunk applying it carefully with no mirror. When she was done, her lips were bright red against her pale face. "I feel human," she whispered. "For the first time since surrender, I feel human." Someone else bought cigarettes. Someone else bought soap, extra soap, beyond what they were given. Someone bought a notebook and pencil. Greta bought nothing that first night, just stood in the doorway and watched. Watched women who'd lost everything pick up chocolate and lipstick and soap like they were picking up pieces of themselves they'd thought were gone forever. On Friday, the mail came. Not everyone received letters, but enough did. Enough that the barracks filled with the sound of paper rustling, of envelopes being torn open, of voices reading aloud or whispering to themselves. Greta received one letter. From her mother. The envelope was thin, the paper inside thinner. Her mother's handwriting cramped and shaky. Malnutrition made the hand unsteady. Greta sat on her bunk and read it slowly. Her mother wrote about the basement where they lived now. The house above had been destroyed completely in February. Nothing left but rubble. The basement had a ceiling leak, but it was shelter. Food was scarce. They were eating dandelion greens and potato peelings when they could find them. The ration cards gave them bread 3 times a week, black bread, mostly sawdust. Sometimes there were turnips, sometimes nothing. Her younger sister had lost a tooth. Just fell out. From malnutrition, the doctor said. Nothing to be done. Her mother's dress had worn through at the elbows. She'd patched it with fabric from an old curtain. It looked ridiculous, but there was nothing else. The letter ended with, "If you have anything at all, please send it. Your sister is so thin. I'm afraid." Greta folded the letter carefully, hands shaking, throat tight. She looked around the barracks, at women lying on mattresses, wearing cotton dresses, clean, fed, warm. She thought about breakfast that morning, eggs again, potatoes, bread with jam this time, coffee with sugar, actual sugar, white and sweet. She thought about her sister, 7 years old, losing teeth because there was no food. She thought about her mother, wearing a dress patched with curtain fabric, boiling weeds, and here Greta sat, in an enemy prison. Better fed than she'd been in her own country, better housed, better clothed. The guilt was crushing, physical, like a weight pressing down on her chest until she couldn't breathe. She lay back on her bunk, stared at the ceiling, tried not to cry, and failed. Around her, other women were crying too, reading their own letters, hearing their own stories of hunger and cold and desperate survival. The enemy had given them soap and food and shelter. Their own families had nothing, and there was no reconciling that. No way to make it make sense. No answer that didn't require dismantling everything they'd ever believed about loyalty and nation and what it meant to serve. Greta closed her eyes, held her mother's letter against her chest, and tried to understand how kindness from the wrong people could feel like the cruelest punishment of all. Time moved strangely in the camp. Days blurred together in a rhythm of bells and meals and work. Morning bell, breakfast, laundry. Lunch, more laundry, dinner, barracks, sleep, repeat. 3 weeks became 4. 4 became 5. Greta's hands grew calloused from the work. The skin on her palms thickened. Her arms grew stronger from lifting wet uniforms and wringing out heavy fabric. The muscles in her shoulders adapted to the repetition. Her body was changing in other ways too. Ways she tried not to notice but couldn't ignore. Her face was filling out. The sharp angles of her cheekbones were softening. Her ribs were less visible when she washed. Her hips had substance again instead of just bone beneath skin. She was gaining weight. They all were. The American food, 3 meals a day, every day, more calories than they'd seen in years, was restoring their bodies whether they wanted it to or not, whether they felt they deserved it or not. One morning, Greta caught her reflection in the polished steel of a washing drum. The face looking back was rounder than she remembered. Healthier. Younger somehow, as if captivity had peeled away years instead of adding them. It made her feel sick, because her mother was still in that basement, still boiling weeds, still watching Greta's sister grow thinner. And Greta was here, getting healthier, getting stronger, her body betraying her loyalty with every pound gained. His name was Miller, Private Miller. She'd learned that from overhearing other guards talk to him. Young, maybe 23, tall, brown hair cut military short, a scar on his left hand that looked like it came from something sharp. He was one of the regular guards at the laundry building. Stood by the door most days, watched them work. Made sure no one caused trouble, though no one ever did. What trouble could they cause? They were unarmed women washing clothes. Greta had been watching him for a week before she realized she was watching him, before she caught herself tracking his movements, noticing details. He was different from the other guards. Quieter. He didn't talk much to the other Americans, didn't laugh at their jokes, just stood there with his rifle slung over his shoulder, watching with an expression she couldn't read. Sometimes he looked sad, sometimes just tired, sometimes like he was somewhere else entirely. One afternoon in the 5th week, Greta was carrying a basket of wet laundry toward the drying lines when she tripped. Her foot caught on something, uneven flooring, a loose board, and she stumbled forward. The basket flew from her hands. Uniforms scattered across the concrete floor. Some landed in puddles of soapy water. Greta landed on her hands and knees. Pain shot through her palms where they'd hit the concrete. Her knee throbbed. She froze there for a moment, waiting for the yelling, for punishment, for whatever consequence came from clumsiness. Instead, footsteps approached. Someone crouched beside her. Private Miller. He said something in English. His voice was quiet, concerned even. Greta looked up at him. Their eyes met for the first time, really met, not just the glancing contact of guard and prisoner. His eyes were gray, or maybe blue-gray. Hard to tell in the dim light. He reached out his hand, offering to help her up. Greta stared at the hand, at the scar across his knuckles, at the fingers extended toward her. An enemy soldier, offering help. She should refuse, should stand on her own, should maintain dignity and distance and the proper boundaries between prisoner and captor. Instead, she took his hand. His grip was firm but not rough. He pulled her to her feet easily. Said something else in English, probably asking if she was okay. Greta nodded. "Danke," she said without thinking. Then, remembering, "Thank you." Her English was terrible, heavily accented, but he seemed to understand. He smiled slightly, just a small upturn at the corner of his mouth. Then he bent down and started picking up the scattered uniforms. A guard, picking up laundry, helping a prisoner. Greta dropped to her knees again and helped. They gathered the uniforms in silence, his hands and hers reaching for the same pieces sometimes, not touching, but close. When the basket was full again, he stood and gestured toward the washing tub, indicating she should rewash the ones that had gotten dirty. She nodded, carried the basket away, tried not to think about the warmth of his hand, about the smile, about the fact that kindness kept coming from places it shouldn't. The encounters multiplied. Small things, tiny gestures that shouldn't have mattered, but did. A female guard sharing her cigarette with Elsa one evening outside the barracks. Just held out the pack, offered one. stood there smoking in companionable silence while the sun set. An American cook in the mess hall giving Margaret an extra slice of bread, catching her eye, nodding slightly, an acknowledgement of hunger that went beyond protocol. A young soldier, couldn't have been more than 19, stopping to help the Berlin woman when she was carrying a basket too heavy for her weakened frame, taking it from her without asking permission, carrying it to its destination, setting it down gently before walking away. None of them spoke German. None of the prisoners spoke much English. But language wasn't necessary for these small mercies. They accumulated like drops of water. Individually insignificant. Together, they eroded something. One evening, Greta sat on her bunk and tried to write a response to her mother's letter. She'd been trying for days. Had started and stopped and crumpled papers and started again. What could she say? How could she explain that she was fed and clothed and safe while her family suffered? She settled on vague truths. I am well. I am unharmed. I think of you constantly. I hope this war ends soon and I can come home. She didn't mention the food, didn't mention the soap or the mattress, or the fact that she felt healthier now than she had in 1943. Didn't mention that the enemy treated her with more dignity than she'd expected, than she deserved. Some truths were too dangerous to write, too dangerous even to fully acknowledge. In the 6th week, work assignments changed. Some women were selected for external details. Work in the nearby town, under guard of course, but outside the camp. Greta's name was called, along with 15 others, including Margaret and Elsa. They were loaded into a truck one morning. American soldiers drove. 2 guards rode in back with the prisoners. The road was paved, smooth. The truck had actual suspension. It didn't rattle apart on every bump like German vehicles had. Through the truck's open back, Greta watched America pass by. Fields, green and vast. Crops growing in neat rows. No bomb craters. No trenches. No evidence of war at all. Then buildings began appearing. Houses. American houses. Painted white or yellow or blue. With porches. With gardens. With children playing in yards. A woman hanging laundry on a line turned to watch them pass. Her laundry was white. Actually white. Sheets and shirts gleaming in the sun. They passed a gas station, cars parked beside the pumps. A man filling his tank. Just filling his tank, like gasoline was normal, available. Not rationed into near non-existence. A grocery store. The window display showed canned goods, stacked in pyramids. Abundance as decoration. Greta felt something crack inside her chest. Some final fragment of belief. This was the enemy. This was the nation Germany had been fighting, had been bombing, had been trying to destroy. And they lived like this. In peace. In plenty. While Germany burned. The truck stopped in front of a church. White clapboard. Steeple with a cross on top. Pretty. Peaceful. Utterly untouched by war. The guard gestured for them to get out. They were here to work, cleaning the church grounds, preparing for some community event. Simple labor. Local women were there. Volunteers. They stared at the German prisoners with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility to something that might have been pity. An older woman approached. She wore an apron dusted with flour. Spoke to the guard in English. Gestured toward a table set up under a tree. The guard turned to the prisoners. In broken German. Mittagessen. Lunch. They make lunch. The table was covered with food. Sandwiches. Thick ones with meat and cheese and lettuce. Apples. Cookies. Pitchers of lemonade sweating in the heat. Food prepared by American civilians. For German prisoners. Greta wanted to refuse. Wanted to turn away. Maintain some shred of pride. But her body moved toward the table. Accepted a sandwich from the flour-dusted woman. Heard the woman say something in English. The tone was kind, gentle. Greta bit into the sandwich. Ham. Real ham. With yellow mustard and crisp lettuce. The bread was soft, fresh, probably baked that morning. She chewed, swallowed. Hated herself for how good it tasted. Around her, other prisoners were eating too. Some with tears in their eyes. Some with faces carefully blank. All of them caught in the same impossible contradiction. The enemy was feeding them, again, and again, and again. How many times could you receive kindness from someone before you had to stop calling them enemy? That night, back in the barracks, Margaret stood in front of the small mirror someone had acquired from the canteen. Just stood there, staring at her reflection. I look better now than I did in 1944, she said quietly. My face is fuller. My skin is clearer. My hair is growing back healthy. She touched her cheek. Her reflection touched back. The enemy did this. The enemy made me healthy. My own country was killing me slowly, and I didn't even realize it until I became a prisoner. Else was on her bunk, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them. What do we do with that? She asked. What do we do with the knowledge that captivity saved us? No one answered, because there was no answer. Or too many answers. Or only answers that required admitting things too painful to voice. Greta lay on her bunk and thought about Private Miller's hand, about the flour-dusted woman's kindness, about ham sandwiches and chocolate bars and soap that smelled like flowers. Thought about her mother in Munich, about her sister losing teeth, about basement walls leaking and clothes patched with curtain fabric. The contrast was unbearable. The guilt was crushing. But underneath the guilt, something else was growing. Something she didn't have words for yet. Something that felt like the first crack in a dam. The propaganda had been so clear, so absolute. The Americans were beasts, monsters, destroyers. But the Americans were also the ones who'd given her hot water, who'd fed her 3 meals a day, who'd paid her for work, who'd picked up laundry when she fell, who'd offered cigarettes and extra bread and sandwiches under church trees, who'd treated her like a person when her own country had treated her like a cog in a machine that devoured everything it touched. If the Americans weren't monsters, then what were they? And if Germany had lied about the enemy, what else had been lies? The questions multiplied in the darkness, whispered through the barracks, unspoken but present in every silence, in every full stomach, in every bar of soap, in every small mercy from people who had every reason to be cruel. By the 8th week, the changes were undeniable. The women had been transformed by abundance. Their bodies had responded to food and rest and safety with the resilience of youth. They were no longer the gaunt, hollow-eyed creatures who'd stumbled off ships in June. They were something else now. Healthier, stronger, almost recognizable as the people they'd been before war consumed everything. And that transformation carried its own particular horror, because when they were finally sent home, and they would be sent home, everyone knew that, the war was over and prisoners had to be repatriated eventually, they would return, looking like this, fed, healthy, glowing with the health of captivity, while their families looked like death. The injustice of it was staggering, incomprehensible, a cruelty that no one had designed but that existed nonetheless. Greta wrote another letter to her mother, tried again to find words, failed again, settled for, I am well, I pray you are too, I will come home as soon as they let me, I love you. But she knew when she returned, if she returned, her mother would see the weight she'd gained, would see the health in her face, would know, without words, that her daughter had been fed by the enemy while her family starved. Would that be forgiveness or accusation in her mother's eyes? Greta didn't know. Feared she'd find out soon enough. The 8th week ended. Then the 9th. And slowly, so slowly it was barely noticeable, the women began to shift. Began to laugh occasionally. To joke. To sing while they worked. To apply lipstick from the canteen and comment on each other's appearance. To act, in small ways, like people again instead of just prisoners. And that shift, that return to humanity, was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. Because it meant the enemy had given them back something Germany had taken away. And there was no reconciling that truth with everything they'd been taught about loyalty and nation, and which side deserved their allegiance. The war between nations had ended. The war within them was just beginning. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning in November, 3 months since they'd arrived, 3 months of soap and food and the slow erosion of certainty. The women were assembled in the yard after breakfast. All of them. Not just Greta's barracks, but all the German women in the camp. Maybe 200 in total. Standing in loose formation while an American officer stood on a platform with a translator beside him. The officer spoke in English. The translator, a German-American woman with a Chicago accent underneath her German, repeated his words. Repatriation will begin in 2 weeks. You will be transported back to Germany in groups. Arrangements are being made for processing and return to your home cities. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then the reaction came. Some women cried out with joy. Others gasped. Some stood frozen, faces blank with shock. Greta felt nothing at first, just numbness. Then slowly, something like dread began creeping up her spine. Home. They were going home, back to Germany, back to the ruins, back to hunger and cold and families who'd been surviving without them. back to being German again instead of just prisoners. Around her, women were talking all at once. Excited voices, frightened voices. Questions shouted toward the platform that the translator couldn't possibly answer fast enough. When exactly? Which cities first? Can we send word to our families? What happens if our families are dead? That last question silenced everyone, because it was possible. Likely, even. 3 months was a long time. Letters had stopped coming for some women weeks ago. Addresses that no longer existed. People who'd moved or died or simply vanished into the chaos of defeated Germany. The officer said something else. The translator spoke. You will be given supplies for the journey. Basic provisions. Documentation for Allied checkpoints. You are expected to conduct yourselves with dignity during transport. Dignity. The word sounded absurd. What dignity did they have left? They were women who'd served a regime that had lost, who'd been prisoners, who were now being sent home healthier than when they'd left because the enemy had fed them better than their own country had. The assembly was dismissed. The women scattered slowly, some toward the barracks, some just standing in the yard, looking lost. Greta found herself walking without direction, just moving. Her feet carried her toward the laundry building out of habit, but work wasn't scheduled until afternoon. She sat on the steps outside the building, put her head in her hands. Going home should have felt like relief, like liberation, like the end of captivity. Instead, it felt like loss. That night, the barracks buzzed with whispered conversations. Some women were packing already, organizing the few possessions they'd accumulated. Others lay in bunks staring at ceilings, processing the news. Else sat beside Greta's bunk, arms wrapped around herself. I don't want to go back, she whispered. Her voice was so quiet, Greta almost didn't hear it. What? I don't want to go back. Louder now, more certain. I'm terrified to go back. Other women were listening now. Margaret, the Berlin woman. Others Greta didn't know as well. My husband is dead, Elsa continued. My house is destroyed. My mother wrote that the neighborhood is gone. Just rubble. There's no work, no food, no future. What am I going back to? Your family, someone said. My family is starving. And I'm... She gestured at herself, at her fuller face, her healthier body. I'm going to arrive looking like this, well-fed, healthy, while they're dying. They'll understand, Margarete said. But her voice was uncertain. Will they? Would you? If your sister had been eating eggs and ham while you boiled weeds, would you understand? No one answered, because the answer was no. How could they understand? How could anyone who'd survived in Germany understand what it meant to be fed by the enemy? To be treated with dignity by people you'd been taught to hate? To have your body restored by the very forces that had destroyed your homeland? The Berlin woman spoke up from her bunk. At least here we know what to expect. Routine, work, food, safety. She paused. What's waiting in Germany? Chaos, starvation, occupation, shame. Shame, someone repeated. Yes, that's it exactly. We'll be ashamed. Women who served the Reich and then lived comfortably in enemy camps while Germany died. We weren't comfortable, Greta said. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. They had been comfortable, relative to Germany, relative to their families, relative to what they'd expected captivity to be. They'd had mattresses, blankets, hot water, 3 meals a day, wages, chocolate, lipstick. Small mercies that added up to something more than survival, comfort, in enemy territory, while Germany burned. The 2 weeks passed in a strange blur, time moving too fast and too slow simultaneously. Each day felt endless. Each evening felt like it had arrived too soon. Work continued. Greta still washed uniforms, still scrubbed and rinsed and wrung and hung. But the rhythm was different now. Each uniform felt like the last one. Each day felt like goodbye. Private Miller was still there, still standing by the door, still watching with those gray-blue eyes. On one of the final days, Greta was folding dried laundry when he approached, held out something small that had been fed by enemies. What would she say? How could she explain? She couldn't. There was no explanation that would suffice, no words that would bridge the gap between her experience and theirs. All she could do was return, resume her place among the survivors, carry the secret of soap and eggs and kindness from wrong hands, carry the guilt forever. The train pulled into München Hauptbahnhof on a gray afternoon in late November. The station was partially destroyed. Sections of the roof were gone. Track repairs visible everywhere. But trains were running, barely, held together by necessity and Allied oversight. Greta disembarked with the others. They were processed quickly by Allied military personnel, given papers, instructions on where to report for ration cards and housing assistance. Then they were released, simply released, no longer prisoners, no longer anything official. Just German women in a defeated nation. Greta walked through Munich alone. The city was unrecognizable. Block after block of rubble. Buildings reduced to shells. Streets cleared just enough for traffic, but still lined with debris. She passed people who looked like ghosts. Thin, gray, faces hollowed by hunger and exhaustion. They wore clothes that hung loose, shoes tied together with string, moved slowly, conserving energy. Greta felt obscene among them, her fuller face, her healthier body. She tried to hunch, to make herself smaller, less visible. She found the address her mother had written. The street was mostly destroyed, but the building, or what was left of it, was marked. She went around to the back, found the entrance to the basement, knocked. Footsteps, slow, hesitant. The door opened. Her mother stood there, but it wasn't her mother. Couldn't be. This woman was ancient, skeletal, hair completely gray, skin hanging loose on bones, eyes sunken deep. But it was her mother, 3 months older, 3 months hungrier, 3 months closer to death. Her mother stared at her, at Greta's face, at her body, at the health that captivity had given her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then her mother stepped forward, pulled Greta into her arms, and began to cry. "You're alive," she whispered. "You're alive. That's all that matters. You're alive." Greta held her mother's frail body and felt it shaking with sobs, felt the bones beneath papery skin, felt the terrible truth of what survival had cost. Over her mother's shoulder, she saw her sister, standing in the shadows of the basement, 7 years old but looking like 5, thin legs like sticks, that missing tooth, eyes too large and a face too small, staring at Greta with an expression between joy and accusation. "You were fed," those eyes said. "While we starved, you were fed." And Greta had no answer, no defense, no explanation that wouldn't sound like betrayal, just the weight of soap in her bag, the memory of hot water, the ghost of kindness from enemy hands, and the knowledge that she would carry this, all of this, for the rest of her life. That night, Greta lay on a pile of rags in the corner of the basement. Her mother and sister slept nearby. The ceiling leaked in 2 places. The cold was brutal. There was no food until morning rations could be collected. She opened her bag quietly, found the chocolate bar Private Miller had given her, the Hershey's bar that had survived the journey. She could eat it, could taste America one more time before scarcity reclaimed her completely. Or she could get dried laundry when he approached, held out something small, a candy bar, Hershey's chocolate. She looked at it, at him, at the chocolate bar extended in his scarred hand. "For journey," he said in terrible German. The accent was so bad she almost smiled. She took the chocolate. Their fingers brushed. For just a moment. "Thank you," she said in English. Then, because she needed him to understand, "You were kind when you didn't have to be. Thank you." She didn't know if he understood the words, but he nodded, smiled that small half-smile, then walked away. Greta slipped the chocolate into her pocket, felt the weight of it there. A small kindness to carry home, one of dozens, hundreds. Small kindnesses that had accumulated over 3 months until they'd become something she didn't have words for. The final breakfast in the camp was the same as every breakfast. Eggs, potatoes, bread, coffee. Nothing special, nothing ceremonial, but it felt different. Every bite felt weighted with significance. This was the last time, the last meal in captivity, the last meal where food would be abundant and assured. Greta chewed slowly, tried to memorize the taste, tried to prepare herself for what came next. Because when she arrived in Germany, there would be no breakfast like this, no eggs, no butter, no white bread, just whatever rations the Allies were distributing, just hunger that had become normal. Her stomach would have to relearn scarcity, her body would have to adapt to deprivation again. After 3 months of healing, she would start breaking down once more. The thought made her set down her fork, made her unable to take another bite. Across the table, Margaret was crying silently, tears running down her face while she ate, not bothering to wipe them away. "I don't know how to be German anymore," she said to no one in particular. "I don't know how to go back to being the person I was before." "None of us do," the Berlin woman said. "We're different now. Changed. Whether we want it to be or not." "Changed by the enemy," Elsa added. Her voice was bitter. "Saved by the people who destroyed our country. Or destroyed by the people who were supposed to save us," Margaret countered. "Depends on how you look at it." The silence that followed was heavy, because both statements were true. Both realities existed simultaneously. Germany had sent them to war and given them nothing. America had made them prisoners and given them everything. And somewhere in that contradiction, they'd lost themselves. The trucks came at dawn, 5 of them, enough to transport all 200 women to the train station where they'd begin the journey back. The women assembled one last time in the yard, each carrying a small bag of belongings. The bags were provided by the camp, canvas with rope handles. Inside, the clothes they'd arrived in, now washed and mended. A bar of soap, basic toiletries. Some had added items from the canteen, chocolate, cigarettes, small treasures. Greta's bag held her clothes, the soap, the chocolate bar from Private Miller, her notebook with its pages full of questions she'd never answered, and one letter from her mother that she couldn't bring herself to leave behind. The guards were there to oversee departure, some familiar faces, some new. Private Miller was there, standing off to the side. He caught Greta's eye, nodded once. She nodded back. A goodbye that couldn't be spoken. The women were loaded into trucks. Greta found herself in the 3rd truck, sitting on a wooden bench with Elsa beside her and Margaret across from her. As the truck started moving, pulling away from the camp, Greta turned to look back. The barracks, the laundry building, the mess hall. The shower building where this had all begun 3 months ago with a bar of soap and hot water. The camp that had been prison and sanctuary both. It grew smaller, then disappeared as the truck turned onto the main road. The journey took 3 days, truck to train, train to ship, ship across the Atlantic, then another train into Germany. Each leg of the journey felt like moving backward through time, the abundance of America giving way slowly to the scarcity of war-torn Europe. On the ship, they were given rations, still more than Germany had, but less than the camp. The adjustment had begun. Greta lay in her bunk on the ship, different bunks, but the same Atlantic, and tried to prepare herself. She would arrive in Munich in approximately 1 week, would make her way to the basement where her mother lived, would knock on whatever door still existed, would see her mother's face, would see her sister, would see in their hollow eyes and thin frames. Greta held the bar in her hands, felt its weight, its promise. Then she set it aside for mourning. For her sister, for one small gesture of redemption. She lay back down, stared at the damp ceiling, listened to her mother's labored breathing, her sister's whimpers. Even in sleep, the child was hungry. And she thought about the soap, about hot water washing away more than dirt, about the Americans who'd treated her with dignity when they had every reason for cruelty, about the food and the mattress and the small mercies that had saved her body while breaking her spirit. She thought about Private Miller's hand pulling her to her feet, about the flour-dusted woman offering sandwiches under a church tree, about guards sharing cigarettes and cooks giving extra bread. She thought about what it meant that the enemy had been more humane than her own country, what it meant that captivity had restored what freedom had destroyed, and she understood finally that this was the real wound, not hunger, not defeat, not even death, but the knowledge that kindness had come from the wrong side, that everything she'd believed about loyalty and nation and who deserved allegiance had been shattered by something as simple as soap. The war had ended, Germany had lost, the Reich was ashes, but the hardest battle, the one between what she'd been taught and what she'd lived, would never end. She would carry it forever, the weight of clean skin and full stomach granted by enemy hands, the guilt of surviving while others died, the impossible truth that the people who'd imprisoned her had treated her more humanely than the country she'd served. Outside, somewhere in the ruins of Munich, church bells rang, marking time, marking survival. Inside the basement, Greta closed her eyes and tried to find peace in a world where everything she'd known had been turned inside out, where the enemy had given her soap, and that simple act had changed everything.